Good morning. Well, I guess this is a book that is meant for one of the, or two or three of the people that actually visit my site, because I look at the numbers, 3, 4 or 5 visitors, although there was one a couple of books ago that managed to get about 600 views, and then it dropped down to about 1, which is very weird. I don't understand the algorithm at all, but that particular book mentioned LGBT things, and I guess this one is also about LGBT things as well, so we'll have to see what the numbers go on this one. But I'm not trying to add the numbers, put the numbers up simply because of the title on this one. It just happens to be about LGBT things as well. However, there we go. Yeah, this is a weird one. One of my weird ones. Going to read, of course, from this. It's written somewhere around about 2014. The Angel, the Coward, and the Parasite-A Faerie Tale. And I gotta say, this is for adults only. And it's one of my books that's only 99p, because it's not the longest book in the world. It's a Roman Eclee, and you got to look that up for yourself. Where to go? Well, you know, I was never one of those people who was able to read Lord of the Rings, basically because of the names, you know. Mugo of Ugdi, you know, it's just, I couldn't get my head around the names and the places, just basically because I couldn't remember them all. You know, they're not English, and I do like English names like John and Frank and Susan, because I'm a very simple person, really. So I decided to create a book exactly like that. Undecipherable names. But there you go. Anyway, it's all in here. Transvestites, sexual predators, sadomasochism, psychics, weird stuff, in a place far and far away in my imagination. So it's a wonder that nowadays the prim and proper artificial intelligence had anything to do with it at all. However, it was a book that needed to be written at the time, and so I'm not ashamed of it, because it had to be written. But I think the AI did a reasonable job of it. It struggled a bit, I think, with the names. But there again, they're American. And if you get to read the book, you might struggle a little bit with the names as well, but no more than if you were reading Lord of the Rings. And I don't know how I can even dare say my book in the same sentence as that great work of art. But I have, and there you go. So, The Angel, the Coward, and the Parasite. Here it is.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're immersing ourselves in a source that it's truly unlike anything we've encountered before.
It really is.
It's the decades-long, utterly raw reminiscences of a man named Risteard Pheoden. And he frames this whole thing as a kind of broken fairy tale.
A fairy tale that's missing a hero. And that missing hero is really the key to our deep dive today for you, the learner.
Right.
Risteard narrates his own story of self-destruction, his descent. He even calls it his personal catabasis.
Catabasis, of course, being that classic journey down into the underworld.
Exactly. A journey to gain wisdom, usually, but in his case, it was a descent into an underworld of his own making.
So our mission is to track this catastrophic intersection of identity, really passionate, but let's say deeply non-traditional love for Siùsaidh Molde and just overwhelming self-interest.
Yeah, how did these things all combine with, financial ruin to end in this profound betrayal? It's almost a blueprint for how tiny cracks in a life can let total disaster take root.
We really need to start with Risteard's foundation then. He describes himself at the beginning as an educated farmer whose life was perfect.
But right there on page 1 is the immediate red flag. He talks about this growing fissure in his field, a literal crack that he just chose to ignore.
A perfect metaphor.
It's a perfect metaphor for his complete inability to see the reality that was unfolding all around him. He felt safe in this, flawless existence while his world was already starting to fracture.
And what's so fascinating is that this fragility was there long before Siùsaidh even entered the picture. His first marriage.
To Hukathe, yeah.
It ended so suddenly when she left him for silver.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the ultimate rejection.
Exactly. And that divorce left him just emotionally devastated and so profoundly vulnerable. He had this terribly fragile confidence and an almost desperate need to be accepted, to be liked. That pre-existing wound made him highly susceptible to influence. He just couldn't set boundaries. And that creates the emotional foundation for everything that follows.
So the story really kicks off in King Scallion. The source calls it a busy naval city, notorious for its base and scandalous living.
It's the total anti-Oedris, the exact opposite of the serene life they dreamed of later.
And it's here, at the weekly Valhalla dance, that he meets the captivating Siùsaidh Molde.
And Siùsaidh is described with this almost ethereal glow. She's a witch devoted to the goddess Seren, and you can't miss her with those intricate silver rings and that stunning flaming crown of long red and vital hair.
But before they even meet, Risteard has already built his own escape mechanism.
That's right. The mechanism is the genesis of his alter ego, Azalea.
He describes how after the divorce, this complicated friendship with Dane Haddix.
A man he later correctly identifies as a lazy, stubborn sexual predator.
Yes. That friendship coaxed him into cross-dressing, often fueled by blue turmeric.
And for you, if you're not familiar with this source material, blue turmeric acts as a potent hallucinogen. Risteard believed it amplified his kinder, gentler self. It allowed him to suppress the male persona he saw as, clumsy and unloved.
So Azalea, he wrote, was born from a desire for connection and pleasure.
And the Valhalla dance was one of the very few places Azalea could exist publicly.
So the connection between Risteard as Azalea and Siùsaidh was immediate and intense. They bonded over their mutual interest in the occult, Wicca, spiritualism.
It's an instantaneous kinship. They felt like a perfect key had found the perfect lock. And for him, Siùsaidh's acceptance of Azalea was just everything.
And we can see why that acceptance was so important to her, too.
Absolutely. If we look past the beautiful spiritual facade they built, all the talk of souls and ancient Oedris realms, the law of karma, we find Siùsaidh's core, and it was just defined by relentless trauma.
Her past is just devastating. Physically and mentally abused by her fanatical Sanaluma parents, Lorendere and Nelsa.
And then her first husband, Uoko, was a brute who beat her so savagely she fled.
But in fleeing, she had to leave her baby daughter Anafiel behind. And that act of abandonment just haunted her. It defined her actions for the rest of her life.
Her history of male brutality explains everything about her romantic preferences, doesn't it? She was so intensely drawn to Risteard's gentle nature.
And his acceptance of Azalea.
Which she actively encouraged. She saw it as the truer, safer part of him. Her tendency to physically lead, whether in a dance or intimacy, that was her way of controlling her environment. It was a clear form of protection that came directly from her trauma. She was looking for the softest, safest male presence she could possibly find.
I get the appeal for security, but let's be clear. Risteard's embrace of Azalea, even if it started as self-discovery, it ultimately became an act of profound selfishness.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where the fatal flaw shows itself, long before any financial collapse.
He quits his king's messenger job, sells his house for gold. They planned to finally move to Owydris, that legendary land of green hills.
To pursue the spiritual, traditional farming life they both claimed to want. This was Siùsaidh's lifelong dream, her salvation.
But Risteard has this crisis of self-realization that is just entirely self-serving. He realizes his addictive need to be Azalea, to go to the clubs in King's Scallion, was totally incompatible with the remote life of Erdris.
He chose his pleasure, his need for the Azalea persona and the city nightlife over her dream. It was the first act of just profound cowardice and self-sabotage.
And because Siùsaidh was so terrified of losing him, she submitted.
She replicated that deep-seated childhood pattern of submitting to the male desire. They moved back to chaotic King's Scallion, and the emotional and financial undoing began right then and there.
And the source says they repeated this disastrous attempt to move 4 more times over the next 5 years.
Can you imagine?
Only for Risteard to pull out at the last moment every single time. That speaks to an incredible level of self-sabotage and really cruelty, forcing her to relive that hope and disappointment over and over.
And the cost was trust. Each failure wasn't just logistical, it was a psychological breach. Risteard was slowly, piece by piece, eroding the very foundation of their relationship.
Proving his needs were always more important.
Always. They burned through the gold from the house sale, constantly packing and unpacking. His weakness created an instability that leads directly to the next inevitable stage.
Which is the financial crash. The gold runs out. Risteard's attempt at selling spiritual items fails miserably.
He had zero business acumen.
So they're broke, stranded in the very city he demanded they stay in.
And to survive, the couple descends into King Scallion's shadow world. They embrace a much darker, much more desperate path. They start going to specialized clubs near the docks, like Travesty.
Which the source describes with horrifying detail. The stench of straw and dead chickens.
It's an astonishing moral collapse, isn't it? To go from a life dedicated to the law of karma to working in that environment.
And how quickly did he justify it?
Immediately. They rationalized it as survival. They became mistresses, working these slave afternoon events for coin. Siùsaidh dominated, she gave pain, she controlled the encounters.
Earning huge amounts of money from highly intelligent professional men. Physicians, engineers, legal clerks.
Right. And Risteard, he was initially shocked, sure, but he quickly found he enjoyed the power. He channeled all his repressed anger, feeling this kind of perverse revenge against the village bullies of his past. He loved the control.
But Siùsaidh's motivation was different.
Very different. Yes, it was financial, but more profoundly, it was an outlet for her immense, unexpressed anger towards the men who had brutalized her. Her father, her rapist, her first husband.
She was finally the one in control.
Dispensing the pain she had absorbed her whole life. But Risteard compounded the problem. He stopped working entirely.
Which just made their dependency on this sickening environment even worse. He rationalized it by saying Siùsaidh was already earning 100 times more silver than he ever could.
And that choice to stop working, to refuse the mantle of responsibility, it created a profound void. And the source makes it chillingly clear. Voids don't stay empty.
They immediately draw the central antagonist into their orbit.
Enter Lort.
Risteard made what he called the greatest mistake of his life by introducing this elderly, wealthy, ex-naval architect, a submissive to Siùsaidh.
He'd saved Lort from a really brutal, ignored whipping at Travesty, where the man was just screaming his safety word, "Ohms," and nobody was listening.
Lort is the textbook definition of the brood parasite.
Oh, absolutely. Subtle, aggressively manipulative, and entirely self-serving. He leveraged their financial stress, which Risteard created, and Risteard's own laziness. He was like a cuckoo chick in the nest.
He starts small, moves from sleeping in the shed to the kitchen floor. He makes himself indispensable, paying for little things, horse feed, food, taxes.
And Risteard, in his self-involved confusion, completely fails to see that Lort is now dictating the terms of their existence.
Lort was observing and waiting.
And psychologically, Lort was a man who hated women but found them irresistible. He sought revenge through this ritualized submission. He became secretly infatuated with Siùsaidh.
And the opportunity just presented itself.
It did. When Risteard's gender confusion caused him to lose all sexual desire for Siùsaidh, he said he felt a kind of revulsion at the thought of performing as a man.
So Risteard failed both the provider role and the intimate role, creating this immense emotional strain, constant arguments.
Precisely. The structural integrity of the relationship had just failed. Lort immediately stepped into the security role Risteard had abandoned.
The parasite had successfully pushed the original chick out of the nest.
And the dependence Siùsaidh felt, her terror of being alone, it meant she accepted the security Lort provided, even if she subconsciously knew how corrosive he was.
The relationship finally snaps when Risteard leaves for 3 months. He goes to walk and camp in the Great Long Forest, supposedly to resolve his gender confusion.
He returns physically broken and really emotionally unchanged.
And Siùsaidh was with Lort. She just tells him, "I've moved on."
Lort, meanwhile, had solidified his position. He started by begging to sleep in chains at the foot of their bed, and then graduated to her partner.
And the moment that really seals Risteard's label as the coward is when he tries for a reconciliation later. As they're talking tenderly in a friend's hall, Lort throws this horrifying fit outside.
Banging his fists on the ground like a 2-year-old, just screaming nonsense.
That infantile aggression, the intensely dormant aggressive baby, as Risteard calls him, that was the reality check Siùsaidh needed.
She realized Risteard, the man she desperately wanted to be her hero, would never, ever fight for them. He refused to take up a sword, even figuratively, to reclaim their life.
So she chose the reliable, immediate security Lort offered, however toxic it was.
Over the risk of Risteard's cowardice and self-absorption.
The final years are so tragically difficult. Siùsaidh married Lort, and then dedicated herself to nursing him through malignant growths, struggling financially because Lort's gold ran low and his generosity just evaporated.
She was trapped, caring not just for Lort but also for her depressed, non-working adult daughter, Enfiel, who had finally come home.
The pressure must have been immense. Risteard describes her physical decline, the weight loss, the severe back pain, a swollen belly.
And she refused to admit she was ill. She was afraid of worrying or burdening others. This refusal to prioritize her own health, it speaks volumes about her lifelong conditioning to put others' needs first.
Whether they were abusive, selfish, or parasitic.
Yes. And Risteard was shocked to realize Lort was perfectly capable of physical work-like clearing sheds, but he routinely misled everyone, forcing the desperately sick Siùsaidh to overwork herself.
He was exploiting her right up to her dying moments.
The most powerful nugget of knowledge, though, the final painful realization, it comes from Siùsaidh's deathbed letter to Risteard.
She had achieved this profound final awareness.
An awareness that entirely recontextualized her life. She realized Lort was still taking from her and she was still giving, fulfilling that destructive pattern that was laid down in her childhood.
That's the tragedy of trauma, isn't it?
Yeah.
The loop she couldn't break until the very, very end. She wrote, "This sickness is actually what brought it home. I understand now, detachment in all its glory. I have detached from both Enfiel and Lort. Excellent."
A heartbreaking moment of clarity that only arrived when she was dazed from death. And this left Risteard with this overwhelming guilt. He finally understood his failure. He concluded he had been a confused good wife, but not a good husband.
What does that even mean, a confused good wife, in this context?
It means he fulfilled the domestic and emotional roles. He was gentle, he was kind, supportive of her identity, but he entirely failed the responsibility of a partner. He failed to provide security, stability, commitment.
By giving in to Azalea and refusing Idris.
He effectively traded his masculine duties for a role that was fundamentally passive and self-indulgent, and that left a vacuum that Lort was all too eager to fill.
Siùsaidh died 77 days after entering the sanctuary. Lort, the brood parasite, died 6 months later.
And Risteard, aided by his loyal astrologer friend Zacchaeus, finally found some stability through the simple, painful act of writing this memoir.
He was an outsider who clung on, driven by survival and guilt.
And the paradox of his life is clear. He found his gentle, true self Azalea, but he did so entirely at the expense of the love and trust he shared with Siùsaidh.
And the devastating impact of her inherited trauma, her desperate need for security, it just ruined her ability to choose well, even as she was dying.
This was a marriage ruined by self-deception and cowardice long before the malignancy took her. Lort, the parasite, exploited Risteard's weakness and Siùsaidh's crippling fear to secure a comfortable life and exact his own small revenge.
Risteard's final image is so profoundly fitting. He eventually finds the oak tree in the sapphire forest where they had carved their heart 27 years earlier.
The inscription was almost gone, but the tree had grown around the carving in a way that Siùsaidh, with her irreverent humor, would have just loved.
He realized the growth had contorted the carving so much, it now looked like a piglet's anus.
A perfect, brutally honest, and yes, slightly humorous memorial to a deeply flawed but profoundly loving life that just dissolved through selfishness. The ultimate lesson this source material imparts is the devastating cost of unaddressed trauma. and the lack of awareness to change a life trajectory.
Siùsaidh only achieved that detachment at the 11th hour.
Which forces us to ask, if Siùsaidh had achieved that level of detachment and self-awareness she described in her final letter 20 years earlier, before Lort, before the financial disaster, before Risteard's ultimate act of cowardice, how radically different would her fate and Risteard's have been? What toxic patterns are you enabling in your own life because you fear the isolation of being alone?